In this video, we're going to talk about the Mac Mini M1 for web development and web design. Hello, I'm your host Casino from Casino.com. I'm the digital alchemist and we got a lot of ground to cover today, so I put some timestamps in the description below. So in this video, I'm going to cover why the M1 Max or Apple Silicon over the Intel-based versions. Then we'll talk about why specifically the Mac Mini. Next, we'll talk about specs, software compatibility, the monitor I recommend, and last but not least, my advice about which M1 Mac you should get depending on the use case. So first of all, why would you choose the M1 Max over the Intel-based versions? Well, first of all, the M1 Max are named after the chip called the M1, and basically it's a spec'd up version of the chips that are in the iPhones and iPads for a few years. I'm not going to go really technical here because there are a myriad of videos just going over every little spec and all the features and all the technical details. I'm really going to talk about my experience as a web developer and web designer. So one of the first reasons I decided to go with the M1 Max is because this is the present and the future. We know that Intel-based Macs are going to disappear. So it kind of makes sense, even though there are great deals for the latest iMac from 2020. But still, I mean, this is the past, and you know, I'm not going to change computers each and every year. So I wanted something that I can use for a little while, and I wanted to embrace the future. That's about it. Now, the next thing is that when I compare my MacBook Pro, which is Intel-based, to the Mac Mini, there are some differences, and that makes a lot of difference for me. Like, for example, the fans. I mean, I never heard the fan of the Mac Mini. Now, as you may know, outside of being a web designer and web developer, I also create YouTube videos. So when I edit in Final Cut Pro, I could see the difference, especially when editing heavy footage. I never heard the fan once on the Mac Mini M1. But if I try to do the same on the MacBook Pro, I'm going to hear those fans so loud that it's disturbing me. Now, I know many people say, what's the big deal? Just put your headset on and you won't hear it. Well, first of all, I don't always have my headsets on. And one thing that people tend to forget is that if you live in a warm country, and I live on an island, a tropical island, then it's really warm. And okay, most of the time I'll put the air conditioning, but I'm not going to put it all the time. First of all, because the electricity bill would just skyrocket. And second, because having the air conditioning on all the time can get you sick, right? So having this kind of headsets all the time when it's hot is not an option for me and for many people living in warm countries. So I appreciate when I can just work without my headset and I don't hear that crazy noise from the fans. Another reason that pushed me in the M1 direction is that I do have an iPad and I see how snappy it is. I mean, this thing is blazing fast, so I trusted that it would be the same on the Macs. Now, this is the first generation of Apple Silicon Macs. So people tend to say that it's going to be the worst of all because it's the first generation. But still, I think it's so good, and especially when I compare with the MacBook Pro because I have both, so I can compare the workflow and it really feels snappier. And if you're a web designer or web developer and you tend to open a lot of tabs, whether in Chrome, Brave, or whichever browser, and even though I know it's not a good practice, but that's how it goes. Usually I start the day with a couple of tabs, and by the end of the day, I have more than 50, sometimes more than 100. I know it's really bad, but that's the reality. I also tend to have many applications open at the same time because I'll be working in the IDE, then I'll be working in the browser, then I have Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, I might have Photoshop, that kind of stuff, and all that open, I really need to feel like it's snappy. Next, let's talk about why choosing the Mac Mini over the MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. Well, first of all, in my case, I already have a MacBook Pro. So getting a new laptop doesn't really make sense for me because, to be honest, the only times I use the laptop outside of where I actually sit is when I have to go and see a client. But aside from that, I never really work remotely, so it doesn't really make sense to go with another laptop. Another pro for the Mac Mini is the fact that I don't like working on small screens. So there's no way I'm going to work on a 13-inch screen unless I'm forced to and I have no other choice. But that never happens. Usually I just sit at my desk and I hook my computer to an external monitor. So if you combine that with the fact that I don't need the portability of a laptop and I already have one, and I'm going to use an external monitor anyway, well, the Mac Mini is the perfect computer in that case. Another pro for the Mac Mini over the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro is that, first of all, it's got a fan, and I know the MacBook Pro has a fan, but the MacBook Air doesn't. And second, the body is bigger compared to a MacBook Pro, so the fan is also bigger and there's more space for the air to flow around and to dissipate the heat. Now, if you live in Canada or in Sweden and it's really cold, and I know you put the heating on, but what I'm trying to say, if you live in a country where the weather is just standard, it might not be an issue except in the summer. But in my case, it's like summer all year long. I mean, in the winter here, during the day, the temperature is going to be something like 26 degrees Celsius, and it can even go higher. And in the summer, that goes through the roof, and the humidity is crazy, so it makes you feel like you're even warmer. So in that case, the Mac Mini and its supposedly better thermal seems like the best option. And last but not least, the price. I mean, this beast starts at $699. Come on. So you could like buy 3 for the price of a spec'd up MacBook Pro. But it's not only about the fact that it's cheap. It's about the fact that it's cheap and it's so damn good. Next, let's talk about specs. So when it comes to specs, the M1 has a small chip, but for a giant leap, as it says in the Apple marketing. So it integrates 60 billion transistors, and I promise you I'm not going to go into too many details, but this is basically what you have to know. It comes with an 8-core CPU, an 8-core GPU, and up to 6 times faster graphics performance, but bear in mind this is compared to the previous generation of Mac Minis. So it comes with a neural engine, and as Apple puts it, it's the brains of the operation. So a 16-core neural engine, up to 15 times faster machine learning performance, once again compared to a previous generation. Now it comes optimized for the Big Sur operating system that you may have heard of, and it comes with a unified memory. Now, what is that and why is that important? So let's take a look at what Apple says. It says 1 RAM to rule them all. The M1 chip brings up to 16 gigabytes of super fast unified memory. The single pool of high bandwidth, low latency memory allows apps to share data between the CPU, GPU, and neural engine efficiently. So everything you do is fast and fluid. So to cut a long story short, it goes way faster. So for 8 gigabytes of memory or 16 gigabytes that you would have in a traditional systems, it feels way faster on the M1 chip. Now, that being said, I've seen some advice in reviews that I tend to disagree with, because I've seen some people say that you should just get the 8 gigabyte version because it's so good you don't need more and you can save a couple of $100. But I don't agree with that, because even though today it works fine with 8 gigabyte, if you want to future-proof yourself, it's going to cost you $200 extra to go from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes. And I know that's money. That's quite a lot of money, especially when you know the prices of RAM and you know that Apple's RAM costs more than traditional RAM. But bear in mind, this is a unified memory, so you won't be able to add RAM afterwards. They may have done it on purpose, but hey, that's how it goes. So if you want to future-proof yourself, in my opinion, you should get the 16 gigabyte. Now, some reviews even went further and said you should get the 512 gigabyte storage with 8 gigabytes of unified memory because that's more than enough. And in my opinion, you should do the opposite. Let me show you. What I would choose is the 16 gigabyte unified memory. So it's going to cost you $899, and then you can get the 256 gigabyte storage, which is what it comes with, so no extra money here. And if you want more storage, you could get something like the T5, which is a super fast external SSD, or you could get the T7. And if you look at the T5, I think it's something like 140 or something, and sometimes you can even get it cheaper, and you get 1 terabyte for that price. I mean, the one I'm showing here is 500 gigabytes, but I got a 1 terabyte one, and it's great. Now the T7 is even faster, but that's going to cost you way cheaper than if you wanted to have a 1 terabyte SSD from Apple. Now let's talk about the I/O. So in terms of ports, you have an Ethernet gigabit, but bear in mind it's only 1 gigabit and not 10. Then you get 2 Thunderbolt 3 USB 4 ports. You get an HDMI 2.0 port, as well as a couple of USB-A ports, and you get a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Now, for some people, that's not enough, and I completely understand that, but for most people, that's going to be okay. And that's also one of the reasons that I went with the Mac Mini, because if you get a MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air, I mean the M1 versions, you only get a couple of Thunderbolt 3 ports, and that's it. No USB-A. And with the monitor that I chose, I have a couple extra USB-A ports and an additional Thunderbolt 3 port. Now, if you absolutely need more ports, there are some solutions like USB hubs or Thunderbolt docks. So here we see the CallDigit USB-C Pro dock. Here we have the Thunderbolt 3 dock from OWC, the Pro version still from OWC. Here we have the Elgato Thunderbolt 3 Pro dock. So there are a lot of different models for various brands, and it can range from 150 to 400 bucks. So it really depends, but it looks like more and more are coming to the market, and thus the prices are going down. So here with the Elgato Thunderbolt 3 Pro dock, you also get gigabit Ethernet, but still 1 gigabit. You get the headphone output, you get two USB 3.1 Gen 2, you get two Thunderbolt ports, a display port, and at the front you also get two USB 3 Gen 1, so it's USB A type, and you get the SD card and micro SD card as well as a headphone jack. So to each problem there's a solution. Now let's talk about software compatibility. So in case you didn't know, Apple announced a 2-year transition. So for the moment, you still have the old Intel-based apps. Then you have the apps that are optimized for M1 and for Intel. And you have apps that are just for Intel, but that you can run through Rosetta 2. So in my case, as an IDE, I use Sublime Text, and it works really well, even though it's only made for Intel, but it works well through Rosetta. If you want to know if an app is ready for the M1 Max, you could just go to the website and check the latest downloads, or you can go to a website called isappleSiliconReady.com, and all you have to do is type the name of the app. So I'm going to type Sublime, and as you can see, it says that Sublime Text is not M1 optimized, but it works with Rosetta 2. It works as fast, if not faster, than on the Intel-based MacBook Pro. Now I know that many developers use Docker, and unfortunately at the time of recording this video, Docker is not M1 optimized and doesn't work with Rosetta 2, at least not completely. But one thing you have to bear in mind is that more and more apps are getting compatible by the day. So by the time you watch this video, it might be compatible. Now, many developers like to use Homebrew, and if you look at Apple Silicon Ready, it says that it is M1 optimized and it works with Rosetta 2 also. So good news if you use Homebrew. Now, if you use the local development environment for WordPress called Local by Flywheel, that's a slightly different story, at least at the time of recording this video. I didn't find any info here on their website, and when I check on is Apple Silicon Ready, nothing pops up. So I went to check out the latest release notes, and I couldn't find any trace of the M1 or Apple Silicon, but that may be coming in the near future. Now, I work a lot with WordPress and Elementor Pro, and in that case, because it's browser-based, and it works fine with M1. I can only say that it works faster, especially if you work with Safari, because that thing is blazing fast. Now, if you are a pure developer, you may not like WordPress and theme builders, but in my case, that's where I get most business from, because in my local market, there isn't much demand for custom coding. But I'm a hybrid web designer and front-end developer, so I still love writing my own CSS, even in WordPress projects. And if you've never used Elementor and Elementor Pro, you should give it a try. You may be surprised. Now, some other piece of software you may be using while building websites is graphical apps. And in my case, I like using the Affinity apps, even though I use Photoshop. I like Photoshop, but lately I use Affinity apps more than Photoshop. So I use Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer. Now, one of the reasons I don't use Photoshop, first of all, is because it's not been optimized for the M1 yet. So when you look at Affinity Photo, it's all optimized. It works with Rosetta 2, but even better than that, it's M1 optimized for Affinity Photo, Designer, and Publisher. Now, to be transparent, even though those apps are M1 optimized and it works well, but one thing I've noticed is that it's so slow to get them started. And actually, even on the Intel-based version, so it seems like it's not related to the M1, but more to the software itself. So let me show you, and I hope you got time. So if I type Affinity, okay, I'm going to select Affinity Photo, and now we can start the waiting time. So I'm probably going to fast forward this, but the last time I tried, it was 17 full seconds before it launched Affinity Photo. Now, I don't know for how long I've been talking now, but as you can see, it's still not there. I'm still waiting. And the thing is, if I launch it a second time, it's going to go faster. So now it loaded, as you can see, but that's way too long. I go nuts. It takes so much time. Now let me close this and let me try one more time. And now it should go way faster. So see, boom, it's already there. And the same thing goes for Affinity Designer. So this is something that they're gonna have to fix because I mean, it makes me nuts. And looking at the forums on Mac rumors, it seems like I'm not the only one experiencing that. And I kind of knew that because I tested it on 2 different devices with the same result. Now, when it comes to Photoshop, if we go to is Apple Silicon ready, as you can see, at the time of recording this video, Photoshop works with Rosetta 2, but it's not M1 optimized. And because I know it can be resource heavy, I really want to use Photoshop in the best conditions. Especially here, you can see that it works in the beta. So there's a beta for all, I think most of the software from Adobe, but at least for Photoshop. But I'm just going to wait until they have a stable M1 version because to be honest, most of the time I just use Affinity Photo, and I usually only use Photoshop when I have something like smart objects, smart layers, that kind of stuff. But for the rest, I tend to prefer using the Affinity Photo software. Next, let's talk about external displays. Now, obviously, when you get a Mac Mini, you have no display that comes with it, so you need to purchase your own. Now, you may already have one, but if you don't, I'm going to recommend one that I absolutely love, and it's the LG Ultrafine Ergo HDR10 monitor. Now, the reference that you can look for if you're looking for this monitor is 32UN88B. So that's the one. So what I like about this monitor is that it's a 4K display, 32-inch, so way enough space if you want to work, especially on web design and web development projects. It's HDR10. It's got the P3 gamut, which is for color accuracy, which is very important, especially if you are a web designer. It comes with an ergonomic stand that you can see here, and it comes with a C-clamp. So basically you can just install it, in a couple of minutes. You don't have to drill holes, although you can because they also have some equipment for that comes in the box, but you can just use the C-clamp and you don't need anything extra. So let's take a look. As you can see, you can really tilt it and put it any way you want. The colors are really good on this monitor. I really like the way the colors pop. It's HDR, although to be honest, I haven't used HDR yet. I just tried it once, I think. And what I really like is this. You can really angle it any way you want. It's so easy to set up. You can be working with people and just switch the display around. And it's very, very easy. As you can see here on the animation, you can retract it from 0 to 18 centimeters. You can swivel it 280 degrees. You can adjust the height, and it's really well done. It really feels sturdy, even though it's made out of plastic, but it really feels quality. You can pivot the screen 90%, 90 degrees, I mean. So if you're a developer and you want to see all your code, I mean, that's amazing. And you can tilt it up to 25 degrees. So they say compatible with every posture, and I can actually confirm that because I use it in a lot of different situations, and I just love the versatility and the way I can use it. I mean, it makes it really comfortable whether I'm working. If you want to, you could even game on it, and I mean, it's a very good display, especially for the price, because usually those displays, 4K displays, especially those that work well with Macs, the price can go up really quickly. So as we saw at the beginning, you can get this one for $599 in the US, and depending on where you live, it might be more expensive. I think in Europe it's 699 euros, but bear in mind, this includes taxes. Now the I/O is very decent. As mentioned, you get an extra USB-C port that you can connect straight to the Mac Mini, so you won't need to use the HDMI or DisplayPort. You get a couple of USB-A ports, a DisplayPort, 2 HDMIs, and a headphone jack. And once again, if you ever need to hook it to a laptop, it can deliver power up to 60 watts. Now, one of the things that I also love about this monitor is that it comes with easy cable management. So at the back, there is a feature where you can neatly hide the cables for a minimal looking setup. Now, let's talk about some of the known issues at the time of recording this video, and the first one is Bluetooth interferences. So it seems like some people have experienced interferences when it comes to their keyboard and their mouse. Now, I'm using the Apple keyboard and the Apple trackpad, and I've had no issues whatsoever. And bear in mind that I have other Bluetooth devices that are on in this room, and I've never experienced issues. Now, I may just be lucky, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, another issue that's been reported by many people is the wake up from sleep problem. And it seems like the only solution was to unplug the cable and then plug it back, or switch off the monitor and switch it back on. And I've actually experienced this issue, and I think I solved it randomly. I'm not even sure, because I went to the Bluetooth preferences and then I clicked on advanced, and there's only one option, and the option is wake from sleep, and it will stick by default. But it seems that when I clicked on advanced, it activated it. I don't know, but since then it works flawlessly. Now, as a side note, if you have an ultra wide monitor, it seems like it's hard to get the full resolution with the Mac Mini M1, but fear not, because there is a solution, and the solution is called Switch Res X. It's a little application that you can purchase straight from the website. I think it's $14. So let me go check. Yes, actually 14 euros for one user license. And I've tried it and it works flawlessly. So basically this tool is going to allow you to use the full resolution from the Mac Mini M1 to the display. Problem solved. Now, let me share my advice when it comes to use case. So first of all, if you have an Intel-based computer and you can afford to keep it and you want to get into the M1 bandwagon, then by all means do it. Because during this transition period, you would get the best of both worlds. You can try the new apps and, the snappy environment. But if you ever need to use an Intel-based app that's not optimized for the M1 or Rosetta 2, then it can still work. And that's exactly what I'm doing, because, for example, I can use Photoshop on the Intel-based Mac and it works flawlessly. I can use all the plugins. But if I don't specifically need Photoshop, I can enjoy the speed of the M1 working with other software. Next, if you are not in a hurry, so you don't need a new computer right now, and you got a bit more budget than for the Mac Mini, then I would wait, and I would either get one of the new iMacs if you don't need the portability, or I would get the next version of MacBook Pro, because you might get a 14-inch, a 16-inch, but more than that, you might get more I/O, so more ports, and maybe even a faster chip like the M1X or the M2. But then again, that's if you don't need a computer right now, because if you need a computer right now, I know people are saying you should wait because the M1X is coming, then it's going to be the M2, then the M3, M4, 5, 5X, 6, 7, you get the point. Now, in my case, I really needed a new machine because some of the tasks I do on a daily basis were getting really hard to complete. And I already had been waiting way too long because I knew that the M1 Max were coming. Now, the thing is, Macs hold their value really well, especially now the M1 Max. I'm not so sure about the Intel-based Macs, even though for the transition period, it's going to be fine. But in a few years from now, that might be a different story. But when it comes to this Mac Mini M1, let's say that in a few months, there's a better one that comes out with more ports and a better chip. Well, I could just sell this one and can probably get, 60 to 75% of its value. So it would just be as if I had been renting this Mac Mini just for a few bucks, and that allowed me to complete my work and get paid. And then I could just get the latest and greatest, but you know what? There's always going to be a latest and greatest. And if you're in that game, you're going to spend a lot of money. But hey, that's just my opinion. Next, if you had to purchase only one computer and it's going to be your only computer, then of course I would go with either a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro. So if you live in a country where it's really warm and if you can afford it, I would pick the MacBook Pro because hey, you never know when it gets really warm and you don't have air conditioning, that fan might help you. Now, if budget is an issue or if it's not an issue but you don't live in a warm country, I think the MacBook Air should be fine. I've heard a lot of praise on that device. Now, if like me, you already have a laptop and you don't need the portability with your next computer, I would go with the Mac Mini M1 all the way, all day, every day. Not only is it a great machine for web development and web design, but you can also game on it. Okay, it's slight gaming, but still you can game on it. You can do video editing. You can do a lot of content creation on this beast. And you know that the thermals are going to be the best or supposedly the best out of the three. Because let's face it, as great as the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro are, the chassis is way thinner, so it makes sense that it's going to be easier to dissipate heat in a Mac Mini. Now, when it comes to 8GB versus 16GB, by all means, if you can afford the extra $200 to get the 16GB, that's what I would get. And like I said, those machines hold their value really well, so if you ever want to sell it, you should be fine. Because bear in mind that once you've chosen your setup, you can never add more RAM in the future. Now, if you got any value out of this video, please give it a thumbs up because it's only going to take you a split second, but it's going to make a lot of difference for this channel. Now, if you want to know why I use WordPress and Elementor Pro, even though I'm a front-end developer, make sure you watch the video that's appearing on screen right now. Like I said, Try it for yourself. You may be surprised.